All right, welcome into another episode of the News for Jags podcast. I'm Jamal St here, alongside Justin Barney. Justin, the book officially closed on training camp. That does it.
It's done. Miller Electric Center has been a great first-year host for the Jaguars. Beautiful facility. Today's practice marked the end of year one of training camp for the Jaguars. Yeah. Amazing.
A lot of excitement out on the field. It's been a long grind for the players and the media included. Yeah. Some hot days, but this officially wraps it up. Now we're counting down to that final preseason game of the year against the Dolphins. That's set for Saturday at 7 p.m. This is going to be a big one for a lot of the guys. I think Doug Peterson shared a story early on, or during his press conference this morning, about Albert Wilson back when he was with the Chiefs, and how that was a guy who was able to earn a spot on the roster by his play in the final preseason game of the year. So there are still some spots and guys that can go out there and earn a job in this game on Saturday.
Absolutely. I think we look back even to last year with Tim Jones. It was is Tim Jones going to make the roster? What fifth receiver? What sixth receiver? Tim Jones was a great success story. Had a great final preseason game last year, made the roster. Who is going to be this year's Tim Jones? I think there's some very good candidates. Today's practice more spirited, I think, than the others have been this week in terms of spirit, more active and more exciting and more plays, more what you would see in a traditional game. I liked Seth Williams today, amazing catch in the end zone down here where he was ruled in bounds with a touchdown. Great catch from him. And practice ended today with Dewey Wingard breaking up a catch of Elijah Cooks. So who is going to make that receiver spot this year? Is it going to be Elijah Cooks? Is it going to be a Kevin Austin? Is it going to be a Seth Williams? Who is going to get that spot this year? So many good storylines like that.
Definitely a lot of questions that are left to answer today. A little bit of a spirited walkthrough, kind of like their Thursday as they get ready for this final preseason game of the year, treating it a little bit like a game prep week, because that's really what it is as they start to get ready for turning the page to the regular season. All right, so we've been impressed, and we've talked about a lot of the players that we've been impressed by so far through camp. Before I get to this question, I did just think of something that I wanted to mention. Devon Hamilton, Doug Peterson gave us a little bit of an update on him. He said he thinks Devon has been doing well and that he could be back in the building as soon as next week, which is good news for a guy that has a non-football related injury on his back. If Devon can be back in the building next week with the team back working, that means he might be back on the field to start the regular season.
And Doug said that today. If everything goes well, keeps progressing, he's going to be a candidate to play in that week one game against the Colts, and that is huge. He is a huge impact player, has had an amazing camp. He's one of the guys where you pick 5 or 6 guys who stood out in camp. Devon is in that top 3 or 4. He has had an amazing camp. So the best player on that defensive front, an aggressive guy, big off season, got a nice contract reward. They like Devon Hamilton. We like what we've seen from him. It'd be amazing if he's back week one.
All right, so we've got our 53-man roster projections coming out soon. We've got a little bit of a bet riding on this one. We put out the first ones. We've got an updated version. We'll see who has the better, closer actual roster here. But let's see, 2 players that you think are on that cut line or are probably going to catch some people off guard by either being on the roster or not being on the roster. Give me two spoilers here.
I'm going to say in my initial cut, I had Shaq Quarterman missing the roster. I think he's still kind of a roster bubble guy. So to me, I think that is a big. Do they keep? Inside back. You keep a Ventrell Miller and start him on the PUP list as a, his foot injury is maybe not healed all the way. Do you keep Shaq Quarterman, the veteran from Oak Leaf High School, had one of the biggest hits last year of the season, forcing a fumble that was recovered by Jacksonville, and we know what happened after that. So do you keep a Shaq Quarterman? So that's my one guy on the cut line where I think that may be, and I've heard and thought about maybe a Jamal Agnew being a potential guy that could be if Parker Washington has emerged. I don't think that's going to happen. Parker is a guy they've tried to get kick returns out of and stuff. I don't think Jamal Agnew would. Maybe if Parker Washington had exceptional final game, it's considered. But I think Shaq Quarterman for me, and another guy, I don't know. Jamal Agnew came to mind early in camp. Trey Herndon came to mind early in camp. But I think right now, I would just say Shaq Quarterman was my guy to watch.
All right, where you had Caleb Chase on before I get to my two?
Caleb, I think if there was another guy pressing Caleb, and
that's the thing.
There's nobody there. I know the fans want Caleb gone. Would he be a surprise cut? I think so, because again, he's 4th year of a rookie deal. It's a sunk cost at this point. If there was a rookie behind him, a guy who was really pressing to get those reps, but there's not. Caleb is about the best option right now. Maybe Yasir Abdullah supersedes him at some point. But I don't think in the camp you don't have another guy right behind him pressing him. So the fans will not get their wish. Caleb will be on this roster next week.
I 100% agree with you. Okay, so I've got 2 guys for you. I think Ventrell Miller is not going to be on the final roster. And I'm not sure that he gets cut. But I think he ends up on the injured reserve list. You mentioned
Okay.
PUP. He can't go on PUP because he's already practiced. You have to be put on that before training camp, before he hits the field. So he'd have to either go injured reserve or he's on the roster or cut. So I think Ventrell Miller actually gets cut. I think Shaq Quarterman was able to hold them off. They know what they get from the veteran linebacker. I think Shaq Quarterman is going to be on this roster this year for at least another year
Bold
while
move.
they try and hold on to Ventrell Miller, maybe on the practice squad or maybe on injured reserve. But that's where my antennas are on that one. And then my other guy, he's been around here a little while, and not necessarily a upset here, but I think Chris Claybrooks ends up getting cut. He's had some legal issues off the field, but overall the Jaguars have been drafting youth at cornerback for 2 back-to-back years, and now I think that youth movement just finally kind of pushes him out of the way. They feel too good about some of these young corners. They're able to contribute on special teams, even if Claybrooks is known as that special team stalwart. So my 2 guys, I'm going to give you a Chris Claybrooks.
Okay.
And Ventrell Miller. I'll even give you an offensive one. I got Snoop Conner on the cut and bubble too,
Yeah.
but I don't know if that surprises anyone.
That's not a cut. That's not a cut. If you keep 3 running backs, you keep 4 running backs. I think these are questions that, I mean, is a guy like Jamal Agnew eventually expendable with a Parker Washington resurgence? You know,
You're pushing this Jamal Agnew expendable thing,
I've
aren't
seen
you?
people on social media mention that, and I've thought about it. You know, maybe it's, maybe it's, I don't think it happens, but I've thought about that move.
The one thing that you will look at is maybe tight end, running back, even some of the cornerback situation, maybe even safety, with the press that they have on offensive line and defensive line because they have these questions. Cooper Hodges, for instance, they don't seem to think Cooper Hodges is going to miss the full season. In order for him to go on short-term IR, he has to stay on the roster after the 53-man movement, which means they'd have to cut someone that they want to bring back. So then they have to hold him as one of the 53 and then can add him to that short-term IR where they can bring him back later in the year. So where do you get that extra spot from? You know what I mean? So that means maybe they want to keep 4 running backs and ultimately do, but going through cuts, maybe they keep 3 because they think Ernest Johnson will clear waivers.
Yeah.
Maybe they do that somewhere else because, again, the defensive line, there's questions about Devon Hamilton
Right.
and if he'll be ready for week 1. And Foley Fatukasi's in a boot.
Right.
So do you cut an extra cornerback? Do you cut a Daniel Thomas and hope that he clears waivers to bring him back right afterwards, so that way you can clear up those roster spots and keep a little bit of depth at some of those spots. So there's a lot of looming problems here. Doug Peterson even said you'd rather have those injury issues early in camp than later in camp, but that's just not what happened for the Jaguars this year.
That's not, and it sucks for a guy like Cooper Hodges who was trending towards making the roster. They love Cooper Hodges, fan favorite, and then the patella injury in the preseason game in Detroit. So yeah, if I had to pick, I would say a Caleb on Chason probably needs to be off the roster, but just there's not the guy behind him. There's not that depth. So you look at those roster questions, where's that depth behind in these spots? You mentioned a Chris Claybrooks. There's depth behind there. There's rookies that have played very well in camp, pressing for that. So again, that you look at those spots, and Caleb Vaughn is not going to get cut despite the fans. But I do think we will see a surprise cut or two. We always see it.
Yeah, there's going to be some interesting moves, some interesting wheelings and dealings. Again, cuts happen next week. Final preseason game of the year set for Saturday. We'll have plenty of coverage coming your way. Another episode of Teal the Show coming your way on Friday. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us here in the podcast, and hopefully you've been hanging out with us all training camp long. We appreciate it. The podcast will continue throughout the season, so hopefully we'll see you here next time.